All right, you know the drill. Hilaritas Press Podcast, exploring the world of Robert Anton Wilson. As announced last month, Hilaritas Press has released a new, enhanced edition of David J. Brown's classic collection of psychonaut interviews, Mavericks of the Mind, which includes a new interview with Rosemary Leary. And so, right here, right now, it's my great pleasure to share with you my chat with David J. Brown. David J. Brown, it's been a long time coming, but welcome to the Hilaritas Podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much, Mike.
Yeah,
It's a pleasure to see you.
yeah. We've talked about having you on, and it's finally worked out, and it works out well because I was surprised. I was talking to Rasa early this year, and he said that he was working on Mavericks of the Mind re-release, and that lit me up. And I'll tell you why. I talk about the website deoxy.org a fair amount because my interest in Leary led to that website, and that's how I discovered Raw, but also got a deep dive on McKenna and Watts and Leary back when that website was doing its thing. But then my next stepping stone from there was Mavericks of the Mind, because it was like this who's who of that psychonautic age. And had you had interviews with everybody I was interested in, and it led me to so many more people from there. So I'm excited to take part of this release.
Oh, well, that's wonderful to hear. Yeah, this is going to be the third edition. We're excited about that. I've heard that from a number of people that it was instrumental in helping to turn them on to the people in the book and to new ideas. So I'm really happy to hear that that was helpful for you as well.
Yeah. So I'm just curious a bit about your story and how you got here or how you got there to Mavericks of the Mind. Maybe we'll start there and into the, psychedelia, and met all these people and hung out with Robert Anton Wilson every week for 17 years. What can you tell me about you and how this all started?
Yeah, so the adventure began. Oh gosh, how many years ago now? It was back in the late 1980s, around 1988 or so, when Rebecca McClellan Novick and I used to spend used to spend our evenings going late into the evening discussing philosophical ideas. What does it all mean? What is the nature of reality? What happens to consciousness after death? What is God? And we would get stoned and high late into the night and experiment with various psycho psychedelic mind expanders and different fungi and things, and just we got into this audacious idea one night that maybe we should query some of the most brilliant minds on the planet and see what they had thought about some of these philosophical ideas. We hadn't really seen anybody else do this in interviews before. People usually stick to what's going on, the latest in their work, and we really wanted to explore these more meaningful and deeper philosophical questions. So that was the basic inspiration, and we already had, connections to some of these people like Terence McKenna and Timothy Leary, and we thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to go around and actually interview all these people about these things, and that set us off on the adventure. We did every one of the interviews for Mavericks of the Mind in person.
Uh,
These days I mostly do interviews, by phone or on the internet, and we actually went to visit each person and it sat in their living room and spent time with them. So it was really quite an adventure, and I'm really happy to see that all these years later, the interviews are still relevant, and not only relevant but still on the cutting edge, really. And excited to see that the new edition will be coming out soon.
Great, great. And how did you make those connections with McKenna or Leary or Wilson? And in the first place? You,
Well, after I graduated from NYU and got my master's degree in neuroscience, I a friend told me that the authors that you like, the books that you read, you'd be surprised how welcoming they would be if you just wrote them and and told them you'd be interested in hanging out with them and seeing them. And I thought this was a great idea. After I graduated from NYU, I drove across the country by myself, and then spent the next 3 months living out of my car and going around and visiting people, people whose work had inspired me. And that's how I met people like Oscar Janiger and Timothy Leary and others who became the people, many of the people I interviewed for the book. I originally got interested in these people through Robert Anton Wilson's book Cosmic Trigger. That was
uh,
many of the people that I interviewed and that I got went around to interview were people that he had spoke about in his book. So that was how I got started on that.
yeah, there's something about Bob Wilson introducing so many people and ideas through his writing that sends people like me and you off all these different rabbit holes, huh? And different
Yeah,
directions.
yeah. The book really was a trigger in a very cosmic way. I mean, not only for me, for a lot of people over the years
Yeah,
I've spoken to, that book was extremely instrumental in setting them off on their mind expanding journeys of their own.
nice. Yeah, I've heard that as well. And so, how did you, is that how you came to meet Bob? You just wrote him a letter or?
No, actually, the way that I met Bob was a little different. I had I was living in Santa Cruz at the time. This was a few months after I had finished that those travels around the country and visiting different people, and I went to a lecture that Bob was giving in downtown Santa Cruz. And at the end of the, as I was traveling across the country, I also got this idea that I should write a science fiction novel, based on the research that I was doing at NYU at the time, and sort of taking it to a psychedelic level, the electrical brain stimulation work that I was doing. And so I was working on this novel, and I was getting close to finishing it. And and I went to this lecture that Bob was giving. And at the end of the lecture, I went up and very nervously kind of went up to him and asked him if maybe he would be interested or he would be willing to write a promotional blurb or quote for the back cover of the book. And Bob did not seem terribly enthusiastic about the idea, to be honest. He sort of, okay, well, why don't you have your publisher send me the book and I'll see what I can do. And I did. I had my publisher send Bob a copy of my book, Brainchild. And I was astonished, Mike, to see just, a few weeks later that Bob had actually written an 11-page introduction to the book.
Mm,
So it was mind blowing for me, and that was how I first got to know him. I went to go visit him in Los Angeles, where he was living at the time with his wife Arlen, and we spent an afternoon talking together. And he invited me then to these weekly meetings that he had. He had weekly discussion groups where we would um, where we would discuss a specific book, such as works by James Joyce, Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake, Ezra Pound's Cantos, and other books, his Illuminatus trilogy.
mm.
And I made it a point to come to these weekly meetings. And I went every week while I was living in Los Angeles, and then just by profound synchronicity, I moved up to Santa Cruz maybe around 5 years later, and Bob and Arlen moved at pretty much almost exactly the same time.
Wow.
So it was not blind land on my part or his part, but somehow it happened, and so I barely missed a weekly meeting between the,
Wow.
the Santa Cruz and the Los Angeles discussion groups. So that was how I got to know him, and I interviewed him then my book Mavericks of the Mind, and then again for my book Conversations on the Edge of the Apocalypse. And he was just very supportive of me and my work. He even paid my rent one time, helped me pay my rent when I couldn't afford it, and just really was a great friend, and not only supportive friend, but a tremendous inspiration in so many ways. His own work, Cosmic Trigger and the Illuminatus trilogy and Prometheus Rising and all his other books were tremendously influential in me developing my own concept of what's real and helping to explain the mysteries of the psychedelic experiences that I was having at the time.
That's excellent. And so just wow, so you had your publisher send them a book and you got 10 pages back. That's
Pretty
that's
mind
pretty
blowing. You
yeah,
could only imagine, how thrilled I was. I mean, I was just 25 at the time, that this happened. And I hadn't had anything really published yet, and except for a few articles in the local paper. So this was absolutely thrilling for me. And then I got Bob's introduction to the book, and then managed to get quotes from Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna, and John Lilly. So it was very exciting for me and a very great confirmation that I was on the right track with what I was doing with my writing and
yeah,
my life.
absolutely. And at one point that book was published through the what I'll call the old New Falcon, but it sounds like that wasn't the original publisher. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that was the original publisher. It's just that Falcon had gone through, I think, like three or four different names.
Yeah,
They were originally called the Falcon Press. Then there was another Falcon Press that sued them, so they became the New Falcon Press. And then there was a whole controversy with Christopher Hyatt's son that led to them calling it the original Falcon Press. And so
right.
there's been all these different evolutions with their name, but they were the original publisher of the book.
Okay.
And
So you were already connected with Nick Tharcher and New Falcon before you met Bob.
well, I only connected in the sense that I had written them a letter and with my book. And I went to like 20 other publishers, and they were the only one that was interested. So I was excited because I actually loved all the Falcon Press books that
Yeah.
not only Robert Anton Wilson but Lester Crowley and Christopher Hyatt and other great authors. Antero Wally that I loved. I was a huge fan of Antero Wally's Angel Tech at the time. That also had a great influence on me.
Yeah, they had quite a cast of characters that were thriving in the 80s that you were a part of and into the 90s.
Yeah, and Nick has kept it alive, to this day. My good friend Rachel Turetsky and Doug Wingate, their new book on the Eighth Circuit model of the brain is going to be published by New Falcon. So I'm happy to see that they've kept it alive. It's a pretty small press, and pretty niche press, but I'm glad that I know they've reached a lot of people with their work.
Yeah, it was actually funny you mentioned that because I was reading a preview of Rachel and Doug's book this morning and just diving into it. It's very thorough and it takes me a while to peel into the layers, but I'm excited for that to be released, for them to release that with Nick.
Yeah. The Eighth Circuit model of the brain that Bob and Tim developed, I think, is the most important psychological model, developmental model that's been developed. I think it's light years ahead of anything that Freud and Adler and even Jung, was able to come up with, and that it explains everything um, that the basic psychological models explain, plus what happens with psychedelic and mystical experiences as well.
Yeah, as a meta framework, I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess you answered one of my questions in that those weekly forums that you attended with Bob were primarily almost like a book club in a way, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, they were book discussion groups, and also movies. He would sometimes show movies,
Mm,
Orson Welles films, and Orson Welles was one of his great heroes. And we would talk about the um, we would talk about the movies. A big part of it also was just hanging out. I mean, there was a lot
sure.
of wonderful people there. Valerie Corral was a regular member, and Nick Herbert used to come regularly, and there was always Keith Henson, the founder of the L5 Society, used to come, and there was just a constantly rotating, group of fascinating people, and a lot of it was just spent, getting high and talking, about different different items in the news or different philosophical ideas, and they were just, great fun.
Yeah, I can only imagine the depth and conversation and the fun times. That sounds pretty awesome. So tell me, and maybe you can pick which one to go first, but we've in the past talked about discussing John Lilly for the podcast and then Rupert Sheldrake, and I believe you worked with both of them. Is that correct? Close relations with both of them?
Well, I worked with Rupert. I was good friends with John. Good friends with both of them. But Rupert, I actually had a 5 year experience working together. John Lilly, how did I meet John? I met John through I was living in LA at the time, and I was hanging out at Oscar Janiger's place and Timothy Leary's place, and I got invited to a party at John Lilly's. He had an estate in Malibu at the time, and I was thrilled because I was a big fan of John. Um, and after the party, a couple of weeks after the party, his daughter Barbara contacted me, called me on the phone, and we started hanging out regularly. And she invited me up there, and I started hanging out, pretty much weekly. There weren't discussion groups or anything like, it wasn't that organized like what went on at Bob's. It was just a rotating group of people, and John, sitting in the center, making interesting philosophical comments every so often. But it was also a tremendous inspiration for me, and it was through getting to know John and Barbara that I then got that interview with John that we used for Mavericks of the Mind, where I was able to really explore his ideas in depth, and everything from his work with electrical brain stimulation, which was the work that I was doing at NYU. I really wanted to discuss with them, and then his development of the isolation tank, and his work with um, human dolphin communication, and his LSD and ketamine experiences, of course, were great fascination for me. His book, Programming and Metaprogramming, the Human Biocomputer, I thought was one of the most important books that I read, up there with Bob's book Prometheus Rising and Timothy Leary's Exopsychology. Those were some of the most
Mm,
important and influential books, I thought. So I was really excited and happy to be able to explore all these ideas in depth with John, and so I was delighted to also have the opportunity to spend time with him. Got to do ketamine with him. Got to spend time at his place in Hawaii, and those were absolutely tremendously wonderful memories that I still reminisce about.
nice. Did you get to spend time with the dolphins? Is that
No, I got to know John after
post dolphin?
yeah, that was post, so I never really got to spend time. I know he was doing his original work was down in the Virgin Islands, but he was, I think, doing some work in Marine World in San Francisco, just prior to me, meeting him. And that's his daughter Barbara, I know, was involved with that work, but unfortunately, I never got to swim with the dolphins.
Yeah, that would have been something else. But it's, I mean, two amazing series of interactions there, regular meetings with John Lilly and his rotating crew, and regular meetings with Robert Anton Wilson and his rotating crew of,
Yeah, and Oscar Janiger and Tim Leary were also a big part of that time in LA. But then you asked about Rupert Sheldrake, my experience
Yeah.
with Rupert Sheldrake, who's the controversial British biologist who is most well known for his developing theories of morphic fields or morphogenetic fields, the idea that there are these non-material regions of influence that help to guide the development of form or biological form specifically with morphogenetic fields, and the idea that what happens in the past helps to increase sort of grooves in time and helps to increase the probability that those same things happen in the present and the future. And he's developed some really interesting experiments, really simple, easy to do experiments that anyone can do that can help provide evidence to substantiate these views. But anyway, I was very interested in his work, and my friend Nina Graboi, um, who's also interviewed in the book Mavericks of the Mind. Um, Nina had Nina knew Rupert, and she told me that in exchange for an eternal slavery, which I agreed to, that she would get me this interview with Rupert, and I went down to Esalen, did the interview with Rupert, and that's one of the interviews also in Mavericks of the Mind. And then a couple of years later, Nina told me that Rupert was looking for a research assistant, um, someone in California who could help him with the book that he was doing. He specifically wanted someone to gather stories about unusual animal behavior prior to earthquakes. And
Mm.
I was especially keen to take him up on this offer. And I told Nina that I would be not only delighted but super excited to do this, and thought I was more than qualified with my research background from NYU and my interest in all these subjects. And she ran this by Rupert, and Rupert agreed to have lunch with me one afternoon in San Francisco. And after I met with him, and he hired me on the spot. And we spent the next 5 years working together very closely on these different projects. About a month after that time I met him in San Francisco, he invited me to his home in London. And I spent a month there. He had an extra bedroom, and I spent a month in his home um, where we discussed the experiments that we can do. In addition to to collecting stories about unusual animal behavior prior to earthquakes, I also did work that helped to substantiate his view that pets can anticipate their owner's arrival. I would I what I ended up doing for that research was I put ads in the local paper in Santa Cruz, and on the help wanted section, asking people if if they had never noticed that their dog or their cat waited by the window or by the door or in a specific place before their owner came home, and if they thought this was a way of predicting their owner's arrival. And I found a number of people that I was able to coax into doing these experiments. And I would go to their homes and set up these video cameras in the place where the dog or the cat or whatever the pet was that was reputed to wait in a specific spot, and set the video camera going. And then the owner would go out and take a pager that I would give them, and at a random time sometime over the next 3 hours, I would buzz them, and they would come home. Then I would go back and collect the videotape, and then I would go through and code in the videotapes, how much time the animal spent in that particular spot, to see if there was a significant amount of time more that they spent in that spot, after the person had been buzzed and was on their way home. And we got significant results that are summarized in some scientific papers that we co-authored together, and also in his book. Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home, which was the best-selling science book in the world in the year 2000. And
Wow.
there was a lot of criticism, criticism of his work and the book. And they said that, oh well, um, well, maybe they're, not really, it's not really something telepathic or psychic, that maybe it's just it's the same time of day, or it's the sound of the person's footsteps, or the sound of the person's car, or the smell of the person, or all these different things. And so Rupert ran experiments to control for each one of these different factors that the skeptics
Mm.
had suggested. So, so we had people come home. That's why I did the random times. It wasn't the same time every day. We had people come
Mm.
home in the opposite way the wind was blowing, so it wasn't their smell. We had people come home in taxis, so it wasn't the sound of their car. We even had people come home in wheelchairs, so that they wouldn't hear the sound of their footsteps, and we still got significant results. So there really was an unexplained factor to this, and Rupert was he's just a genius at being able to come up with very simple experiments that virtually anyone can do that give us results that conventional science has great difficulty explaining. The second book that I helped him with, The Sense of Being Stared At, was another one of these. Apparently, people that are blindfolded and have someone staring at their back can do better than chance at being able to tell when someone is staring at them or someone's not. And and there are some people that are especially good at this. So some people score like 80%. There's some people that are just so there's something going on. And Rupert suggested that it was his morphic field theory that helped to explain how some of this information was transferred in the way that dogs and other animals could anticipate their owner's arrival, and the way people can sense being stared at from behind. Almost everybody's had that experience of thinking somebody is looking at them, and then they turn over their shoulder and there's somebody looking right at them.
Yeah.
So he took very seriously these ideas that many people have talked about for years, but had just never been explored scientifically. I remember him telling me that that um, animals had been very carefully studied in the wild, and very carefully studied in laboratory conditions, but no one had really studied the human pet bond. And why was that? It seems like such an important and obvious thing to study, and so many people report psychic connections with their pets. So I was very excited and felt very honored to be able to be involved in that research, and I have a great psychic bond with my cat here today. So
Nice. Were there any like mind-blowing experiences when you were doing this research? Like the data just shocked you or
um, I mean, just the fact that that there really was some truth to it, because I was initially somewhat skeptical about
right?
whether animals can really pick up on their owner's intention to come home. And before I was doing the research with Rupert was already convinced of it because he had already done some preliminary research. So
Mm.
I don't know that there was a particular mind-blowing experience that actually happened, but the slow gathering of the data was very compelling
Right.
and extremely convincing, and it certainly won me over.
Yeah, the Rupert's ideas are for the scientific materialist, that's a hard pill to swallow, and I know he's gotten tons of pushback, some of what you mentioned, and
Uh,
imagine that's part of his job is to build just bulletproof experiments or to minimize the randomness like you discussed.
yeah,
That's
well, he's very good at addressing the criticisms that people bring up. Just very, very in a very sequential way, just goes through each one of them and addresses them, and he consistently gets pretty mind-blowing results. He has a great book out called Seven Experiments That Could Change the World,
Mm,
and that book presents experiments that anybody can do at home. In addition to the two that I mentioned, that will generally produce results that, like I said, conventional science just have great difficulty explaining.
fascinating. Well, I not only did I enjoy Mavericks of the Mind for all the different, um, my heroes, I guess you would say, heroes and heroines at the time, and introduced me to all these people. But your interviews, I felt, were just really thorough and very well done.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm curious, and I've noticed when I was just looking at your bibliography leading up to this interview, you've got every interesting topic in the world right now that's really, about curiosity, and you have a book of interviews on the who's who of that subject from uh, more than, you have Mavericks of the Mind, and what there's Conversations on the Edge, and then
Yeah,
medicine, the one on medicine, and one
yeah,
on, um, so you have just this whole catalog of
Y-
interviews, and I'm
y- yeah. We've done seven collections of interviews now.
seven.
Yeah,
Okay. What I'm curious about your interview process. Like, what do you do to prepare for an interview? You,
yeah. Well, what I basically do is I read um, everything that I can by the person. I really spend a lot of time
uh,
researching it. I never go into an interview cold. I um I usually spend actually a couple months, at least a month, reading their major works and watching other interviews. And as I'm doing that, I'm normally, I like to experiment with cannabis and coming up with questions, and I work on the questions for quite a while. And by having, I think, a really good foundation of what I'm going to ask, gives me more of the freedom to be spontaneous,
nice.
during the interview. But I often have a really good foundation. Um, uh, yeah, in my very first interview with Terence McKenna, when we when we arrived at his he was at the S1 Institute, and when we arrived there, he fired up this big fat joint at the time, and he passed it around the room, and we got extremely stoned at the time, and I was terribly inarticulate. I couldn't think of a word to say, and just very dutifully, I was very glad I had my all my questions, prepared carefully on paper, and just dutifully read through those questions during the interview. But
It,
I think it's really the preparation that I put into it, and that I really read, everything carefully. I mean, I've had people interview me for radio shows, and sometimes the first question is, so David J. Brown, I haven't read any of your work. Tell us what you're about, or something like that. So
thanks.
I think I gained the trust of a lot of the people that I interviewed by they could see how much effort I put into preparing for their work before I did the interviews.
Very nice. And I could just imagine the situation with Terrence, and somehow he's able to just rattle off some incredibly poetic answer. Well,
Yeah,
if it
he
was
was.
me, I feel like I'd be hanging on to the walls so I didn't float away, and somehow Terrence is just being Terrence.
Yeah, I mean, my partner Rebecca McClendovik and I, we're both, pretty much stunned in silence from all the cannabinoids in our brain. But Terrence was just, fueled by it. I mean, he was the best storyteller, that I ever knew. He was just so articulate in being able to explain the things that, we were always told that, the psychedelic experience was ineffable, that there was no way to explain it in words.
Uh,
And, he somehow managed to find the words to explain the things that no one else was really able to do. And, yeah, you'd be hanging on the edge of his seat,
yeah, yeah. There's a line from him that I think about a lot when I think about him. and he said something to the effect that he believes that whoever has the best story wins. And it's
Well,
like,
he was certainly the best storyteller. So yeah, he
yeah,
certainly had a lot of really, really wonderful, wonderful stories.
yeah, yeah, amazing, just hypnotizing listening to him too.
Mesmerizing. Yeah,
Right.
mesmerizing. Yeah.
And well, so I noticed that I believe it was that interview we're discussing now was published in the Critique. Was that the Critique, a Journal of Conspiracies and Metaphysics?
Yeah, that was actually the first place that it was published. It's also in Mavericks of the Mind, and
Right.
it's in Terrence's book, The Archaic Revival,
Okay.
and it's been reprinted and was reprinted in High Times magazine. It was in a number of different magazines, and
Okay.
different excerpts from it were in different places because it was a pretty extensive interview. But yeah, Critique was the first magazine that I was published in. After being published in a few newspapers right around the time when Brainchild was published. I'd almost forgotten about that. Thanks for reminding me of that.
Yeah. Well, it
Yeah.
stood out to me because Bob Wilson had published 4 or 5 pieces in Critique in the late 80s, and I'd say 3 or 4 of them are just absolute bangers, just excellent uh, essays.
Yeah,
And
they had great articles. It was edited by a fellow named Bob Banner. I remember.
right.
Yeah, yeah, they were wonderful. I remember loving them at the time too. It was an important um, publication.
Yeah, yeah. I probably have a few issues when I was looking for those Bob Wilson essays, and they were full of all kinds of interesting things. So
Yeah.
it struck me when I saw that you had published that interview with them. Well, let's see, what else can we discuss? You just had a book come out, a newly published book, and my notes are. Tell
Yeah,
me
yeah,
about that.
the one that just came out is Psychedelics and the Coming Singularity, and
Yeah,
that's also it's my most recent collection of interviews. Duncan Trussell is in there. Graham Hancock, Grant Wilson. Uh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Who else do we have? Um,
I know the name, but I can't remember it. But kind of
um,
a modern version of Maverick for the Mind in a way,
yeah,
right? The more recent.
Andrew Gallimore. We explore, the concept of the singularity, which is, uh, which is, um, which is, Ray Kurzweil popularized the term that it's the singularity in physics is, you know, the point before the Big Bang, the origin of the universe, or what lies in the center of a black hole, where all our known laws of physics break down, and we can't really predict what happens next. And Kurzweil and others, Kurzweil was really the one who popularized the idea that that you can apply this to the evolution of artificial intelligence. And he back in the 90s in his book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, um, talked about how the computational power in computers was doubling and doubling, and it was growing at an exponential rate. And he predicted that by the 2020s that we would have you know artificial general intelligence AGI. And back then, people thought that the first of all, many people thought it wasn't even possible, that it would never happen. And then people who did think it was possible thought it was at least a century away. And it was because they were looking at it in a linear sense and weren't
Mhm.
understanding that there was an exponential growth. And now that we're in the 2020s, we see that we're very close to AGI now, artificial general intelligence. Kurzweil predicted it for 2029. Some people think it's going to come along sooner, and then it'll keep growing. And the computational power will keep growing, and it'll eventually become not only smarter than any one human being, it'll become smarter than all human beings combined, which is what Kurzweil predicts for around 2043, and it looks
Mm.
like that's actually a conservative guess the way things are happening right now, because computers will be able to design better computers, which will be able to design better computers. So artificial intelligence keeps bootstrapping itself, and will eventually reach a place where it's not only smarter than, where it's at least as intelligent as all human beings combined, and then smarter than all human beings combined. And when it reaches that stage, that's what
Mm.
Kurzweil calls the singularity, because like in physics, it's just something that, we can't predict what's going to happen from that point on. So that's a concept that I explored in my new book, and discussed it with a lot of the different people that I mentioned, and also the other um, concept that we went into, or the ideas that we discussed, has to do with the development of the DMT research. That's the DMT, dimethyltryptamine, is a chemical that's naturally found in the human body. Many people assume it's in the human brain as well, and it's also found in virtually every plant species. It's so common in
Mm.
nature that it's in every glass of, trace amounts in every glass of orange juice. Actually, it's just everywhere in
Oh.
nature, and
Hmm.
no one knows, what function it serves. And in all these different places, no biochemist or biologist can tell you. It's a profound mystery why this chemical is everywhere, and yet doesn't seem to have any clear function, and any clear biological function at least. But most fascinating thing about it is that if you vaporize or inject significant quantities of it, it becomes the most powerful psychedelic known to human beings. And um, one of the most common things that people report from their experiences with DMT is contact with other entities, independent seeming entities that seem to have their own autonomous existence in this hyperdimensional realm. It's after people do a significant dose of DMT, they feel like they're completely transported to another world, and that they develop, contact with these higher entities that seem um, not only more intelligent than human beings, but also seem to know us better than we know ourselves.
Mm.
And so I explored this in the book, and asked a number of people what they thought about their experiences with DMT and what they thought about the DMT entities. And we also discussed with Andrew Gallimore and Carl Hayden Smith the the research that they're now doing at Imperial College and elsewhere, where they're putting people into extended states with DMT, so that it lasts longer than the 5 or 10 minute flash that you get from smoking it, and that people can then stay in these things for a full hour or even longer,
Mm.
in order to really test these ideas to see if people can develop sustained contact with these entities and really bring back any substantial information. Can they help us build new technologies? Can they help us build starships and time travel machines, or help us with our ecological problems, or help offer advice that might be able to give us some kind of wisdom. So I'm really intrigued by that, and that was another subject that we covered. Carl Hayden Smith, one of the people I interviewed for the new book, is was one of the test subjects in the new extended state DMT research. So I got to talk to him about his experiences in the extended state, and they're absolutely fascinating. And as an addendum to that, that triggered the uh, the the, the latest book that I just did, which is the illustrated field guide to the DMT entities. And I worked on this with my longtime friend Sarah Finn Huntley, and this was a concept that we actually developed maybe around 10 or 15 years ago, when we were tripping together in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and and we were discussing the DMT experiences and the entity contact, and how interesting it was that so many people report similar types of entities.
Right.
The jesters and the self-transforming machine elves and the octopus type beings, and there's a whole range that you think that if this was just random hallucinations, why was there such consistency in the reports that people came back with? So we had sort of mulled this idea over for years, and during this time, I mean, initially when we talked about it, it was a really obscure drug. I mean, Terence McKenna was talking about it, but it seemed like maybe only a few hundred people on the planet had
Right.
really done it. It was not that well known, um, and uh, and since then, it's become very popular as a shamanic tool for people, partially due to Rick Strassman's book DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And since then, there are now the internet is just overflowing with reports of people that describe their entity contact. And and so Sarah and I finally, thought this would be a good time to do our book, and we wanted to put together a field guide. It was sort of in the spirit of the books that I used to love as a kid, like the Golden Guide to Reptiles and Amphibians,
Yeah.
or the different types of plants and animals. And I just used to love those books as a kid, the illustrations in them and the descriptions. That's how I learned a lot about science and nature. And we thought, wouldn't it be a wonderful idea to actually do this with the DMT entities? You could illustrate them. She's a brilliant artist, and I could write the descriptions of them. And that was the inspiration behind the latest book, the illustrated field guide to the DMT entities, which was just published just printed by Intertraditions, and it'll be coming out next few months.
Excellent. Yeah, I saw February of 25 on Amazon, but maybe it's
Yeah, I think it'll be earlier than that on the
excellent.
Intertraditions website. But
Okay. But
yeah,
when I saw that, I guess there was a part of me that kind of took those DMT entities for granted, but the suggestion was that there is some sort of objectivity to that, that there's common experiences and people are seeing these. So
yeah.
it's not Terrence isn't the only one seeing self-transforming machine elves, is what I'm getting. And
Yeah, I mean, well, they've done surveys. Johns Hopkins did a survey. A number of groups have done surveys where they, just um, interviewed hundreds of different DMT users, and they've been able to categorize these into basic groups. The reptilians are common, the octopus beings are common, the self-transforming machine elves that Terence described are very common. Elf-like, gnome-like beings, are extremely common. And there's also an interesting crossover between the DMT entity reports and the alien abduction phenomena.
mm,
And I was very curious about that when I interviewed John Mack, the um, the psychiatric researcher. I asked him about that as well, and he also was intrigued by that idea. But the gray aliens, it's very common. People on DMT experiences feel like they're being operated on by alien the gray aliens that are common, and the praying mantis entities are another common experience in my own DMT experience back in 1983, where I first, had my first hyperspace, entry point. I felt like I was being, there was a giant praying mantis creature with my own face on it that was like doing some kind of surgery on my brain, rewiring me and testing me and doing these experiments on me that I think may have actually had some kind of permanent effect on the wiring of my brain. But this is a very common experience that people have with DMT, and it gives some credence to the idea that there could be something to this. And I think it's really interesting that that the DMT entity experience reports are sort of dovetailing with all this interest right now in extraterrestrial contact and UFOs, and what people call the disclosure from the government, the fact that people are coming, that government officials are coming out and claiming that there are secret government programs where they retrieve, um, UFO crashed UFOs and are trying to do reverse technology on them. So it seems like something is going on, and it may be that we're entering into a period where this isn't really going to be the myth and legend, but actual real contact with extraterrestrial intelligence that is going to transform human history.
Wow. That that gives me chills, the good chills, I guess. Not, but the linkage between DMT entities and UFO contactee experiences, that I'm going to be sitting with that one for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
That's that's pretty amazing. Well, wow. While I'm sitting with that for the next month, talk to me. The psychedelics and the singularity. Did you get a takeaway or a theme or your own kind of idea of where we're headed with all this after putting that book together, or a common theme that emerged from all your interviews, maybe?
Well, yeah, I mean, most of the people that I interviewed were hopeful about the
Yeah.
future, and their sense of optimism, I think, is important right now because it is such a crucial and perilous time. I think that the most important thing that psychedelics have to offer, really, and a number of people that I interviewed agreed with me that it's not so much about. I mean, it's wonderful, the psychedelics, and I appreciate all the work that MAPS is doing and other organizations that, that it can help with, mental health disorders, PTSD and obsessive compulsive disorder, that it can help with, near-death anxiety. And I think it's just absolutely fascinating that people can do research with it, with, psychic phenomena and, the DMT entities. I mean, that's just all great and wonderful. I mean, after so many years where psychedelics have been, demonized and criminalized and ridiculed and ignored by the mainstream media. I think it's just, wonderful that they're finally being given the serious attention that they deserve. But I think by far the single most important thing about the psychedelic experience is that it raises environmental consciousness and
Mm.
ecological awareness. I think is probably the single most important thing that human beings can be focusing on right now because of the intense climate crisis that we're facing right now. So I think that was the biggest takeaway that I took from the book, and I think the most important thing that I think psychedelics have to offer, and it's very common, for people not only to develop a greater sensitivity, to their environment, a sense of unity or oneness with their environment, but also with a lot of the plant medicines, with ayahuasca and peyote and San Pedro and the magic funguses like psilocybin. It's very common for people to come back from these experiences, reporting that the entities within the spirit of the plant or the spirit of the mushroom spoke to them about the importance of paying attention, to our environment and the toxic waste that we're spewing into it, and to do something before it's too late, because we may only have decades at the most left to turn things around before the planet becomes unlivable. But I think that psychedelics give us the vision, and I think that artificial intelligence is going to give us the tools to be able to handle these things. So that's why I'm
Mm.
optimistic about where we're going. I think the combination of psychedelics and artificial intelligence, i.e., psychedelics and the singularity, is really the key to us having a fruitful and a hopeful future.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, because when you talk about ecological awareness, it's easy to lose hope and optimism these days. And I think
Uh,
that is one of the key components that Leary and Wilson brought, was optimism and hope. And so it really warms me to hear that's the message that came through with your interviews in that book. I'm going to have to move that up to the top of my reading list, because I always looking for messages of optimism, and that's fascinating. Well, David, it's been a pleasure. I know you did a lot of prep for this interview. I want to make, I deeply appreciate that. I want to make sure that we covered everything. If there's anything that you might have to say that I didn't coax out of you before we wrap this up.
No, you did a wonderful job. I thought that was great, and it was great reminiscing about these things I haven't thought about. The inspiration behind Mavericks of the Mind in a long time, and I'm glad to bring back some of those stories. It's been years, and I'm very excited that the new edition is coming out soon. I'm presently going through the PDF file right now, and looking forward to that. And people interested in my work, www.davidjbrown.com is my website, and my other two recent books are published by Inner Traditions. So,
We'll
so
get
thank you
links.
so much. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Glad we finally connected here, and that was great. Really appreciate it. So,
Anytime, Mike. It's been a
yeah.
pleasure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you to David J. Brown for taking the time to chat. Thank you, as always, to the Robert Anton Wilson Trust. And thank you to Rasa of Hilaritas Press for editing and production. My next episode with Illuminati co-conspirator Bobby Campbell will release as usual on the 23rd of January. Until then, I am your host, Mike Gathers, signing off with love and cheerfulness. Amor et Hilaritas. Hilaritas.